full day. Perfect. So I'm getting a message that this is going to be recorded. So thank you, Carly, for that. And it's 11 o'clock. So I'm going to feel free to get started. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Rabbi Seth Adelson. I'm the rabbi at Congregation Beth Shalom, which is the big building at the corner of Beacon and Shady, in case you haven't seen it. As I was saying, I love this Tikkun Leil Shavuot. It'll be much better when we're in person next year. And by the way, just as a little plug, Beth Shalom is actually having an in-person Tikkun Leil Shavuot that starts tomorrow evening at 9 p.m. after our evening service at 8. And it is possible, I believe, to register to still and to participate tomorrow evening. But it will be only in person, not via Zoom. And we have people teaching from 9 p.m. until, get this, 5:30 a.m. Going all night long. So you are welcome to join us. This particular discussion tonight is we're going to focus on the one of the craziest visions in the Tanakh. There are a lot of visions in the Tanakh, but this one is the vision of the Merkava, the chariot, this heavenly chariot that Ezekiel sees, and it's at the beginning of the book of Ezekiel, and it's actually really a story that functions in a couple of different ways. One of those functions is to give Ezekiel's commission. I did a series, some of you I know were in my series, my Lunch and Learn series this year on prophets. And one of the things that we discovered, particularly for the major prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, they each have a story of how they receive their prophecy, how they receive their commission from God to prophesy. And Ezekiel's is the wildest. As I mentioned earlier, it might help to have a glass of wine to go with this, so or something else. This is very bizarre stuff. Before we get into it very deeply, I'm going to ask that if you've not recited the bracha for Talmud Torah, for learning Torah this evening, it should be up on your screen there. Please feel free to recite the bracha with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And I start every session with a timeline, as some of you know who've learned with me before, because we always got to put this in perspective. Remember that we're here at the right end of the timeline. This is going back about 3,000 years. So King David is back in here, and Ezekiel, he is right in between these two dates. The Assyrian, that's 722 is sort of an approximate date, but the 586 destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians is a good strong date, and right a little to the left of that is the year 598, which is the year that King Jehoiachin of Judah is actually exiled in an earlier Babylonian exile, and and with much of Jerusalem is actually brought to Babylon even before 586 BCE. And so among those people is Ezekiel, and Ezekiel's book actually begins not in Jerusalem, not in Israel at all, not in Judah or Israel, but rather in Babylonia. And what's notable about that is that, as we shall see, it is significant that he's having this vision in Babylonia and not in Israel. It is a reminder that actually that God actually is not only in Israel, but also is in Babylonia as well. And that's an important feature of this particular vision. We'll come back to that idea. So who was Ezekiel? Ezekiel he's born into a priestly family. He's a Kohen from Jerusalem, as I said. And he's actually, of course, he's there as an adult throughout the Babylonian exile. So he's in Babylonia because he's maybe 20 years old when he's brought there. We don't really know, but all of the prophets of this time, of this 6th century BCE period, they're all struggling with this Babylonian exile. This is a big deal, right? Because it's been hundreds of years now since the Exodus, and since the Israelites they've had sovereignty over this land. Yes, the kingdom has been divided, but they're all Israelites, the north and the south. And then what has happened in this time is that there have been marauding armies from elsewhere, the Assyrian Empire and now the Babylonians, who have conquered them. And in particular in 586, when the temple is destroyed by the Babylonians, the temple in Jerusalem is destroyed. That's really a big deal, because that is a sign, that is a clear sign from God, or at least in the minds of the ancient Israelites, that is a clear sign from God that something has gone wrong, right? Something is wrong with this picture. And so what all these prophets are doing, Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah and others, they're all struggling with this idea of how do we reconcile God's presence in our lives when we're in exile in Babylonia. Okay, just as a reminder, let's go back to the screen here. Remember, where is Babylonia? Babylonia is what we today call Iraq, and what you see here, the orange area is the Fertile Crescent. Here's Israel over here, Jerusalem there, and in the various exiles, the Jews have been brought to this area over here, and in particular, the vision that we're going to talk about. Ezekiel's vision of the Merkava takes place, we think, around this city called Nippur, where there is there's a series of canals, and it references, as we'll see in the text, the Kavar canal, Nahar Kavar. And so these prophets are trying to reconcile this, what looks like God's retribution for the people's having done bad stuff, right? God served idols and violated all the major prohibitions of the Torah. The prophet is saying, of course, but God's going to take us back. God's going to take us back, right? So the prophets are trying to be inspiring in the wake of cataclysm, and they're saying, well, we're all over here right now, but eventually we're going to go back over. We're going to be allowed to return, and we're going to rebuild. And Ezekiel, in fact, performs. He in his book, he actually presents the whole arc, because the beginning is about this being in exile. The end is about rebuilding the temple. We're not going to talk about that, but the last 10 chapters or so are all about instructions on how to rebuild the temple and how to get the sacrificial process started again. The rabbis were a little funny about Ezekiel. Now, rabbis, let's back up to the, when I talk about rabbis, okay, yes, I am a rabbi, but whenever people say the rabbis, they're usually talking about these rabbis in here that are living from, let's say, the 1st and 2nd centuries through maybe the 5th century. So this is where the Mishnah and the Gemara, i.e. the Talmud, are all written in this period here. So they're writing, we're looking at 900 to 1200 years after the events that Ezekiel is describing, after the book of Ezekiel might have been written. By the way, and just because the events take place, reference a certain time, doesn't mean it was written in that time. That's another question about biblical scholarship. But let's just go with that. Ezekiel's writing back in here in the 6th century, and the rabbis over in here. Rabbis were uncomfortable with Ezekiel because there were a lot of contradictions in the text. And in fact, among the things that the rabbis say is that this particular piece of the story of the Merkava, which we're going to read, is actually forbidden to even to be discussed, because it's so out there, it's so crazy, that actually if you do, there's something a little dangerous about it. And in particular, we find in the Mishnah, one may not expound, it's in a list of things that you're not supposed to teach. One may not expound on the topic of forbidden sexual relations, in Hebrew, the arayot, before 3 or more individuals. And that might be because then 2 others might talk about it and, encounter some uncomfortable stuff in there. Nor may one expound the act of creation and the secrets of the beginning of the world before 2 or more individuals, because again, that whole creation story, that's a little funny. We're not sure exactly how that works. Nor may one expound by oneself alone. You're not even supposed to study alone the design of the Merkava, a mystical teaching with regard to the ways, etc., unless one is wise and understands most of the matters. So I'm going to go with the assumption that all of you are sufficiently wise and understand the world and the depth of our tradition in order to be able to handle our study of the Merkava tonight. And then this is a great gem also from a different place in the Mishnah. En maftirin ba Merkava. Rabbi Yehuda matir. One may not conclude, says the Mishnah, one may not conclude the Torah reading with the reading of the account of the Merkava, the divine chariot. By the way, in rabbinic shorthand, when we say ein maftirin, in that case, it means you can't read that as the haftarah. By the way, when do we read that as the haftarah? First day of Shavuot, Monday morning. So if you're in shul Monday morning, you're going to hear what we're reading, what we're studying tonight. However, Rabbi Yehuda permits it. That, by the way, whenever there's a general statement in the Mishnah or the Talmud, and then one person says, but so-and-so says it's okay, that person is a da'at yachid, a single voice, a single opinion, and usually we don't hold by the single opinion. So generally, the idea was, you're not supposed to use this. However, we've got, since we do it today, obviously we're sticking with Rabbi Yehuda. So the problem that Ezekiel is answering, when and we'll see this in the text, the problem that Ezekiel is answering is the question that is posed in Psalm 137, which, by the way, Psalm 137 is Al Naharot Bavel Sham Yashavnu Gam Bachinu. By the waters of Babylon, we lay down and wept, right? And later on in that psalm, it says, Ech nashir et shir Adonai alad bat nechar. By the way, for any, there's a setting of this by Salomone de Rossi, who's the greatest composer, greatest choral composer in Jewish musical history. I know that those might be fighting words in some quarters, but I sang this in cantorial school, and I just remember the line, Ech nashir et shir Adonai al admat nechar. It sounds very medieval. But how can we sing a song of the Lord on alien soil? They're over here in Bavel, in Babylon, Babylonia. They're far away from Israel. Is it kosher? Is it kosher, Rabbi? There are no rabbis at this time, but is it kosher for us to sing words of praise to God when we're on foreign land, which, by the way, they thought of as being impure? I see that there are some chats going by, and oh, thank you. That's just a comment on Rossi. Okay, I just want to make sure that I don't necessarily see the chats immediately. So if you say something in chat, I might not pick it up. But let's do the following. We're going to take. Boy, it's tough to squeeze this into 50 minutes. So I'm going to do the best I can. I'm sorry if this is going to fly by really quickly, but it's great material. So we'll try to cover as much as we can. And by the way, I'm also over prepared, which is always a bad thing. I mean, it's good to be over prepared. Yeah, my assistant Audrey is covering. Yeah, I know. I've got too much material. So I will have to cut it off, I think, at 11:50, but I'll do the best I can to squeeze it all in. Okay, so let me put it this way. This vision has spawned a whole area of mystical study of its own. And by the way, there are some who feel like the mystical, reading the sort of the mysticism, the in between the lines kind of stuff from this text dates back probably certainly way before what we think of as Kabbalah, which is really maybe 1,000 years old, maybe, but much earlier than that. Perhaps the Qumran community was using it for, I've read, was using it for mystical inspiration. I do not know anything about Merkava mysticism. I want to lay that out right now. Mysticism, by the way, the Jewish Theological Seminary, where I became a rabbi, was not fond, historically, it was not into mysticism. There are now scholars of Kabbalah there at JTS, but there really weren't historically. And so it was not something they taught us about. I've learned a few things here and there about Kabbalah, but I don't know much about Merkava mysticism. Merkava mysticism is drawing on the language of Ezekiel to envision God on God's throne. And what Ezekiel gives us is this kind of mystical vision of God surrounded by angels, surrounded by fire and lots of light and so forth, and wheels and angels. Okay, so it spawned what the material we're about to read from Ezekiel in this kind of great hallucinatory vision spawned its own line of mysticism, and everything here is kind of dreamlike. And you'll see that the language is striving to explain something that cannot be explained, that cannot even really be comprehended by the human intellect. It's not meant to be understood that way. And as we will see from some of the language, it's all as if it's fire, as if it's electrum, as if it's beryl and precious gems or so forth. But what it does, what the vision does, is it draws together. This is a commentary by Joseph Blenkinsopp, who is a biblical scholar. It draws traditional motifs and ancient mythological themes together, associated with divine appearances, and they are fused in the moment of intense personal experience, imperfectly recollected and even less perfectly articulated. I love it. It's a mushy vision. It's not meant to be really understood. That's something that's actually very sort of special about this. Let's, again, I've got way too much material, so we're going to just have to hop into the text. I'm going to actually invite people to read. I think it's always better to hear more voices than just mine. So is there a volunteer who would like to unmute themselves? Can you unmute yourselves? I think you can. Audrey, would you be willing, since you're there, you're first on my screen, would you be willing to read for us? Can you unmute yourself? Yes, you can.
Certainly.
Thank you.
In the 30th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, when I was in the community of exiles by the Chabar Canal, the heavens opened and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin. The word of the Lord came to the priest Ezekiel, son of Buzi, by the Chabar Canal in the land of the Chaldeans. And the hand of the Lord came upon him there.
Great, fantastic. Okay, so Ezekiel, actually it's interesting that the aspect changes, which is usually an indicator that, it starts off saying I, right? When I was in the community of exiles by the Chabar Canal. And then it moves to, and here the word of the Lord came to the priest Ezekiel, right? So who's the I and who's the Ezekiel? They're actually supposed to be the same person. The rabbis, the ancient rabbis, believed that Ezekiel wasn't written by Ezekiel, but rather was written by the Anshe Knesset Hagadolah, the men of the Great Assembly, who are sort of shrouded in the mysteries of the ancient world. We don't know who they were. By the way, I want to point out, I should have done this earlier, but I want to give everybody access to this sheet if you'd rather look at it. And that's not it. If you want to look at it, you're on your own. Let me just copy it for a second here. That's the sheet address, and I'm putting it in the chat so that you can actually open it up on your own computer and you can study this yourself if you'd like. So where is the Chabar Canal? Or Chabar Canal, as I pointed out, is in Babylonia. And in this around this place of Nippur, that's where Bible scholars think it is. Now, what's the problem? Remember, they're in exile. They're in exile, and God may not be in Babylonia, right? So what's going to happen? Right here up front, verse 3, the hand of the Lord, Yad Adonai, came upon Ezekiel there. He was seized, literally. I mean, that's what the text is telling us. He was seized by this vision of God. Okay, and as we shall see as we move forward, there's plenty of moving Ezekiel around. He sort of gets pushed around here and there and lifted up and moved around. So it's not only sort of this sort of physical, so not only just a spiritual vision, but it's also sort of physical. There's something a little bit a little rough about it, actually. Beth Pomerantz, I see that you're next on my screen. Would you be willing to read for us the next couple of verses?
Starting at I looked?
I looked, yes.
Okay. I looked, and lo, a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north, a huge cloud and flashing fire surrounded by a radiance. And in the center of it, in the center of the fire, a gleam as of amber. In the center of it were also the figures of 4 creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the figures of human beings. However, each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. The legs of each were fused into a single rigid leg, and the feet of each were like a single calf's hoof, and their sparkle was like the luster of burnished bronze. They had human hands below their wings. The 4 of them had their faces and their wings on their 4 sides. Each one's wings touched those of the other. They did not turn when they moved. Each could move in the direction of any of its faces. Each of them had a human face at the front. Each of the 4 had the face of a lion on the right. Each of the four had the face of an ox on the left, and each of the four had the face of an eagle at the back. Such were their faces. As for their wings, they were separated. Each had two touching those of the others, while the other two covered its body.
Okay, thank you, Beth. I appreciate that. So, so the beginning of this vision already begin. What's the first thing that comes out here? We've got wind and cloud and fire and radiance, right? Even before we get to the animals, the figures, we have all this kind of, it's the best special effects of the Tanakh, right? It's the sound and the wind and the turbulence and the light, right? Things that immediately call to mind, oh boy, we got heavy mystical stuff coming at us, right? It goes right to the Mount Sinai moment. By the way, what's the connection between Mount Sinai and this passage in Ezekiel? Well, on the first day of Shavuot, what do we read? But the Mount Sinai moment, the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, and of course. We read this for the Haftarah, so they're connected because they're both sort of visions related to God and our sort of connection with God. Ezekiel doesn't get a revelatory communication the way that Moshe does when Moshe goes up on Mount Sinai, but the themes, the motifs are similar. So then we have these four creatures. Okay, there's a human. It says they had figures of human beings. I think that means that their bodies, but their faces were different. There were four faces that are actually identified later. The faces are a lion, or a human, a lion, an ox, and an eagle, right? And it's funny. I read a lot of different commentaries about this, and none of them seem to really know why these particular animals, why these creatures. I mean, it seems to me those they are kind of the more powerful creatures that ancient people would have been exposed to. So probably, if you're speaking to the audience here and you want to give them a sense of power, certainly you're going to include the lion, right? And the lion also, by the way, is the symbol of the tribe of Judah, which is, of course, those were the people from Jerusalem who would have been exiled to Babylonia in this first wave. So Judah is a symbol of their people. That's by the way, that's from the end of Genesis. Did I include that? I can't remember. No, I guess not. But yeah, the lion is Gur Aryeh Yehuda. The Judah is the lion's cub. Also, the eagle is the symbol of God's having rescued the Israelites from Egypt, because God bore the Israelites out on eagle's wings. Va'asayetchem al kanfei nesharim. That's from Exodus chapter 19. I've carried you out on eagle's wings. So the eagle, of course, is the symbol again of God's power and connection in taking care of the Israelites. So then we come to the ox. Well, the ox is a bit more of a reach. I mean, when I think of oxen in the Torah, of course, I think of, an ox is often a, it's the biggest beast of burden, right? So it's something everybody had oxen because they were really helpful in plowing your fields and so forth. But they're also, in some sense, a symbol of justice. How is that, you ask? Because number one, the ox is one of the animals that's cited in the Torah in a couple places. If you see your enemy's ox lying under a burden, you have to help the ox up. Or if you see your neighbor's ox wandering astray, you have to return the ox. And there's also another sense of justice. You cannot plow with an ox and a donkey together under the same yoke. Also in the Torah, idea being, of course, that the ox is much stronger than the donkey. I would have been surprised if the donkey were one of the faces in this vision, but the ox is stronger than the donkey, so the donkey is going to get dragged along while the ox is moving forward, and so it's not fair to the donkey. So the ox, I think, is perhaps a basic symbol of justice. I might be reaching here a bit, but and then of course the human being is there because, well, we are B'Tselem Elohim, right? We are created in the image of God, and so therefore, of course, that image has to be one of the images that's found in this divine chariot. Something else that's interesting that we come across here, which I really love this, and some of you have heard me talk about it before. The legs, verse 7, the legs of each were fused into a single rigid leg, and the feet of each were like a single calf's hoof. Now, this actually has sort of a, if you will, a practical application in Jewish life today. What is that? That when we recite the Amidah and the Kedusha, and anytime you're saying the words of Kaddish, that is, if you're saying the mourner's Kaddish, somebody's making noise. I don't know who that is, but I don't know if Carly, maybe you could mute whoever's making noise. The reason that we stand with our feet together in reciting certain important prayers in Jewish life is because of the fact that we are supposed to be like these angels, or these creatures in this Merkava, in the chariot. And in fact, we'll come back to this in a bit, but the angels are obviously a very important part of this whole vision. Here, they're not actually described as angels, and we'll see language that refers to what these creatures are. But the angels here described here have this one fused leg. And by the way, they turn, they don't need their legs to turn. So we understand these angels as being sort of able to float somehow, and they don't need their legs to maneuver themselves. But when we are saying these important prayers in Jewish life, we're supposed to stand like angels. We are acting like angels. We are emulating angels. And we are, in particular, we are emulating the angels that appear in this vision of the Merkava. So just notable that they have this fused leg. And yeah, don't turn when they move, etc. We talked about the different faces, and let's. I think we'd actually go on to the next. Of course, the wings are connected as well, so that means they're in one kind of. They're making a kind of a wheel out of this whole thing, one large connected set of wings. Let's, can I get a volunteer? Eileen Lederer, you're next on my screen. Would you be willing to read for us? Can't hear you. I guess you can't unmute. Can you unmute? I can ask you to unmute. How about that?
Okay. And each could move in the direction of any of its faces. They went wherever the Spirit impelled them to go without turning when they moved. Such then was the appearance of the creatures. With them was something that looked like burning coals of fire. This fire, suggestive of torches, kept moving among the creatures. The fire had a radiance, and lightning issued from the fire. Dashing to and fro among the creatures was something that looked like flares. As I gazed upon the creatures, I saw one wheel on the ground next to each of the four-faced creatures. As for the appearance of the structure of the wheels, they gleamed like beryl. All four had the same form. The appearance and structure of each was as of two wheels cutting through each other.
Okay, so again, this is hard to envision, but there are these wheels that are somehow at the bases of each of these creatures, and it's like one wheel inside of another. Perhaps they're at right angles. We don't really know. We can only guess at what Ezekiel is telling us. By the way, so what's the Hebrew word for wheel here? That word is oops. Oh, I hate when it does that. Excuse me a second. Let me fix this.
You'll
go. Hold on. The word is ophan, or ophanim, right here. And if I gotta stop trying to click on things. The word ophan is literally means wheel, but is often understood to mean a kind of round wheel-like angel. Here again, there's nothing that tells us that these things are angels per se. But the way this has been classically understood is that we're not necessarily talking about wheels here. We're talking about other types of heavenly creatures that are a part of this whole vision. So something else that's interesting that you can glean from the Hebrew, easier to see in the Hebrew, it says right here, so mar'eha ofanim u'ma'asehem ke'en tarshish. So in the English, it says, as for the appearance and structure of the wheels, they gleamed like beryl being, of course, a precious stone. But it's ke'en tarshish, not that they were beryl, but ke'en just means it means like, as if. And all of this, as I said earlier, is as if, because it's just impossible to describe. What Ezekiel is getting at is just, it can't be put in human terms, and so he is struggling with explaining this crazy vision, and he's using words that suggest it's a hallucination. It's like a dream. Let's move a little. Let's move on a little more. I want to make sure we get through all this. Who's next to read? Let's see. Stephen is next on my screen. Would you be willing, if I ask you to unmute, would you be willing to read for us? No? Can you unmute? No? Okay, not working? No? Okay, yeah, we can't hear you. I'm gonna have to, well, how about Diane Samuels? Can you read for us?
Sure.
Okay.
And when they moved, each could move in the direction of any of its four quarters. They did not veer when they moved. Their rims were tall and frightening, for the rims of all four were covered all over with eyes. And when the creatures moved forward, the wheels moved at their sides. And when the creatures were borne above the earth, the wheels were borne too. Wherever the Spirit impelled them to go, they went. Wherever the Spirit impelled them, and the wheels were borne alongside them, for the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. When those moved, these moved, and when those stood still, these stood still. And when those were borne above the earth, the wheels were borne alongside them, for the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. Above the heads of the creatures was a form, an expanse with an awe-inspiring gleam as of crystal, was spread out above their heads. Under the expanse, each had one pair of wings extended toward those of the others, and each had another pair covering its body.
Okay, thank you, Diane, for reading for us. So a lot about this, how the wheels sort of are kind of conveying this whole thing, but also not quite, because they can float. So it's again not really clear what's going on, but notable that the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. So the reason we think of these ophanim as being angels is because that's where the real action is happening. That's where the whatever this divine force is that's moving this Merkava is actually located. It's within these ophanim, and they are sort of bearing this whole thing. Also, again, we have they have multiple pairs of wings, it seems. Sorry about this, it keeps happening. Multiple pairs of wings. Again, you just get the sense reading this of like this whole, like so much activity and things moving around and going up and down and moving around wherever they want to go. And it's not even clear. Ezekiel keeps saying wherever the spirit impelled them, or wherever they wanted to go, they could go. But it's not clear why they would necessarily want to, or what they're doing. All we know is just that this vision, it just keeps going on of sort of this intricate pattern of motion. Can I get another volunteer? Ruth Rideboard, you're next on my screen. Would you be willing to read for us? I can't tell if you're paying attention or not. Sure, okay, I'll look at that. Steffi Kirshner, would you read for us, please?
Sure, Rabbi, no problem. When they moved, I could hear the sound of their wings, like the sound of mighty waters, like the sound of Shaddai, a tumult like the din of an army. When they stood still, they would let their wings droop. From above the expanse over their heads came a sound. When they stood still, they would let their wings droop. Above the expanse over their heads was the semblance of a throne, in appearance like sapphire, and on top, upon this semblance of a throne, there was the semblance of a human form. From what appeared as his loins up, I saw a gleam as of amber, what looked like a fire encased in a frame, and from what appeared as his loins down, I saw what looked like fire. There was a radiance all about him, like the appearance of the bow which shines in the clouds on a day of rain. Such was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. That was the appearance of the semblance of the presence of the Eternal One, Lord. When I beheld it, I flung myself down on my face, and I heard the voice of someone speaking.
Okay, so finally we got to the centerpiece, if you will, which seems to be it's so interesting. It's the semblance of the presence of the Lord, right? Mar'eh demut kavod Adonai. It's like it's not even, it's certainly not God's self, but rather some appearance of something that is God's presence, right? It's again, it's just sort of like a dim reflection, or a bright reflection of God's presence, because we can't, Ezekiel certainly couldn't have seen God, and only Moses could do that. But there's something there that reflects God's presence. Now, again, more of these ke'ens, ke'en chashmal. This one is interesting in particular. It's translated here from what appeared as his loins up. I saw a gleam as of amber. So that word in the Hebrew right here is ke'en chashmal. Chashmal, some of you know, if you know some modern Hebrew, you know that Chevrat HaChashmal is the electric company, because Chashmal is the word that when no one really knows what it means, what it refers to. It's, I believe, the Greek translation, the Septuagint translates it as electron, and that becomes in Latin electrum. But we're not really sure what it means. It's some kind of perhaps ancient precious stone. But when Eliezer ben Yehuda was creating the Hebrew language, and the Hebrew Language Academy after him continued making the Hebrew language in the early 20th century useful and as a modern language, they had to create words that meant things that you couldn't find in the Tanakh. So they saw this word chashmal. We're not sure what it means. They adopted it, and they said this is now going to be what we call electricity in Hebrew. So when you encounter that word chashmal in modern Hebrew, it means electricity, but here it does not. It means some kind of ancient, some kind of precious stone, and we're not sure exactly what it is. But here we've arrived at this point where we hear the sound of the wings like mighty waters, and that's when we see God. So it's kind of an assault on the senses, the brilliant flashing, the fire and the wind, and he feels the wind, and then he hears the rushing of the mighty waters, and then there is the appearance of the semblance of the appearance of the presence of God in the middle of that. And that's when Ezekiel says, I realize what I've got myself into now, all the way out here in Babylonia. Here's God, and God is here to give us a message that it's okay to be in Babylonia, that we are a diaspora community, maybe the first diaspora community, and God is with us here. And what happens? God's going to speak. Let's see, David Edwards, would you be willing to read for us? I see you next there.
And he said to me, O mortal, stand up on your feet, that I may speak to you. And he spoke to me, a spirit entered into me and set me upon my feet. And I heard what was being spoken to me. He said to me, O mortal, I am sending you to the people of Israel, that nation of rebels who have rebelled against me. They, as well as their fathers, have defied me to this very day. For the sons are brazen of face and stubborn of heart. I send you to them, and you shall say to them, thus said the Lord God.
And then there's going to be more message that we're gonna skip over. But basically, what is Ezekiel? Ezekiel is receiving his commission, right? All of this vision of the Merkava, the chariot, has been to impress upon Ezekiel that I'm choosing you, my friend Yechezkel. I'm going to send you to go to those stubborn, rebellious Israelites, and you're going to go to them, and they're not going to listen to you, by the way, but you're going to have to give them the following message, which is, of course, you got to turn back to God, right? That's always the message. You got to turn back. You got to keep the rules, the laws of the Torah, and you have to return to the ways of our people, and then, only then, of course, will you be allowed to return to the land of Israel. That you'll be taken, you'll be able to leave this exile in Babylonia. So, interestingly enough, so the Haftarah on Shavuot skips this part, skips chapter 2 entirely, and skips right to the end, which is in chapter 3. Again, I guess, at some point, they realize, well, this is going to be way too long, and that there's already enough going on for Shavuot, there's Hallel and so forth. So we got to get to the end of the service. But the most important part is actually the following. The most important part is when, and this is actually the craziest thing. And again, this is not in the Haftarah, but the most interesting thing is where each of these prophets, they have a thing that either an angel or God does to give them sort of the gift of speech. Okay, Isaiah is greeted by a seraph, a burning angel who's got a coal, and he touches the coal to Isaiah's tongue, and gives Isaiah this gift of godly speech. Jeremiah is actually touched by an angel. His mouth is touched, and he gets the gift. But what does Ezekiel have to do? I see Elaine or Sheldon Katz there. Would one of you be willing to read for us? Sheldon, thank you. And you, mortal.
And you, mortal, heed what I say to you. Do not be rebellious like that rebellious breed. Open your mouth and eat what I am giving you. And I looked, there was a hand stretched out to me holding a written scroll. He unrolled it before me, and it was inscribed on both the front and the back. On it were written lamentations, dirges, and woes. He said to me, mortal, eat what is offered you. Eat this scroll, and go speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me this scroll to eat. And he said to me, mortal, feed your stomach and fill your belly with this scroll that I give you. I ate it, and it tasted as sweet as honey to me.
Thank you, Sheldon. I mean, really, it's so ridiculous as to be like, how do you believe this? So God gives him a scroll, and the scroll is written horrible things, lamentations, dirges, and woes, right? I mean, it doesn't sound like a very pleasant meal, but in particular, he has to eat it. He says, you got it. Okay, in order for you to be able to give this message to the people, to these horrible people who've been, misbehaving, you got to eat the scroll. Now, this is, by the way, not too, we might think this sounds strange, but of course it's not too dissimilar from what we find in Parshat Naso, which we just started reading at Mincha this afternoon, and we'll complete on Shabbat, which includes the story of the trial by what's it called? Sorry, the Sota trial, which is for a woman who is suspected of being unfaithful to her husband, and they write a curse on a scroll. This is what the Torah says. Nobody actually does this. There's a whole tractate of the Talmud about Sota, which basically concludes by saying nobody ever really did this. But the Torah says you write out a curse on the scroll, you pour water over the letters, the ink, and you collect that, and you make the woman drink literally the letters, and the way that she reacts will determine whether or not she's guilty or innocent. Now, again, never actually did that. That's a good thing. But this idea of consuming words, again, seems really, really absolutely crazy, but it spoke to ancient audiences. Wow, they're actually putting words. God is putting these words into the body of Ezekiel. So it wasn't enough that he got this, that he was visited by this Merkabah, this chariot. Furthermore, he had to actually eat the scroll. And by the way, tasted pretty good, which is interesting, right? I mean, you'd think that something that sounds like it's a scroll that's filled with lamentations and dirges might not taste so good, right? Like it would be hard going, and it's a scroll. So I mean, it's not going to taste good, but he tasted, and it's sweet as honey. Vatahi befi kidvash lematok. It was as sweet as honey, which is fantastic. Anyway, so he's not only has been given this charge, he's also been given the power to speak by consuming the scroll. And then the sort of the conclusion. Michael Koblenz, would you be willing to read for us this last passage, and then we'll see if we can squeeze in a few observations before we wrap it up in 6 minutes.
Then he.
Yep.
Then he said to me, mortal, listen with your ears and receive into your mind all the words that I speak to you. Go to your people, the exile community, and speak to them. Say to them, thus says the Lord God, whether they listen or not. Then a spirit carried me away, and behind me I heard a great roaring sound. Blessed is the presence of the Lord in his place, with the sound of the wings of the creatures beating against one another, and the sound of the wheels beside them, a great roaring sound. A spirit seized me and carried me away. I went in bitterness in the fury of my spirit, while the hand of the Lord was strong upon me. And I came to the exile community that dwelt in Tel Aviv by the Chabar Channel, and I remained where they dwelt. And for 7 days I sat there stunned among them.
I love that last line. And for a whole week, I had no idea what had happened. So I sat there among these people in Tel Aviv. By the way, that's not Tel Aviv in Israel. Remember, he's still over. That's where the real Tel Aviv is. The one in Israel today is named after the Tel Aviv that's in Babylonia. Yes. So he's so shocked by this experience, he just doesn't know what to make of it, and he sits there stunned for a week. Notable, and I put this one in bold because it's an important line in Jewish life. In particular, that all of verse 12. Vatisaeni ruach vashma harai kol ra'ash gadol baruch kavod Adonai mimekomo. A great spirit carried me away. Remember, we've got this thing. He's being moved around from place to place, physically displaced, and he hears this great roaring sound. And what does the voice say in the roaring sound? Baruch kavod Adonai mimekomo. Now, if you read any scholarly text on this, you will learn that virtually all biblical scholars believe that even though Baruch kavod Adonai mimekomo, we know that because it appears in Jewish liturgy so much, probably that word Baruch should be emended. That is to say, it may be a kind of a mistake, like a copy error, and that might have originally been in the place of the Chaf Sofit, a Mem Sofit. So it should read Berum kavod Adonai mimekomo. This would make a lot more sense. If you change it to Berum, which means in the going up, then what happens is a great spirit carried me away. Behind me, I heard a great roaring sound as the kavod Adonai, as the presence of the Lord went up from its place. Now, again, that's what the scholars will say, and scholars have a great talent for taking all the wind out of the really all the greatest stories. That's what my JTS education did to me. By the way, they beat all the myths out of us, and then they didn't give us anything to replace it with. But in any case, it's perfectly reasonable. We all know this because it appears in the same text. By the way, the one in which we recite in the Kedusha, it appears in the Kedusha when we're supposed to be standing like the angels. So there's a connection when we're saying those words, Baruch kavod Adonai mimekomo, we're supposed to remember this vision. And I love the idea of, and by the way, with the Kedusha, you've got choreography. Of course, if I stand up, you can't see my face, but you're supposed to lift yourself up while you're in certain places whenever you're saying the Kedusha, because we are supposed to be ascending heavenward like angels. And we say this line, praised is God in God's place. It's kind of got this, what they call a doxological feeling about it. Doxology is a statement of infinite, eternal power on the part of God. So in any case, we're gonna have to wrap this up. There's way more stuff here than we can obviously probably cover in a scant 50 minutes. But in summary, what do we see in this text? We see sort of this fantastic image of power and mystery, right? The wind, the fire, these motifs, the animals that are all animals of power and justice. They're all it's all brought together in this outrageous vision to give a message to Ezekiel, that I want you to be my prophet and go out there and help the Israelites be better people. But B, also, you're in the diaspora, and you know what? It's okay to be in diaspora. We don't know how long we're going to be here. I mean, probably the redactors of this, the scholars would say, well, again, this was probably written afterwards, whatever, and they knew exactly how long the Babylonian exile was. But the message to the audience was, when you're in exile, God is still with you. And that's really important to us today. And here's the ikar, here's the essential message as we wrap this up. And we're going to say Kaddish Drabanan for those of you who want to stick around and do that. Is that we have to remember that wherever you are in the world, you don't have to live in Israel. And I'm not saying this to be like in some kind of anti-Zionist mode. I'm just saying that God is with us wherever we are. And that's a really important thing in the context of destruction of both the first and the second temple. We, the Jews, understood that when we lost the temple, when we could not worship in Jerusalem, we could worship wherever we were. And that's an essential part of Jewish life to this day. Yes, it's wonderful to live in a time in which we can actually go to Jerusalem and we can actually live in Israel if we'd like. That's a wonderful thing. And by the way, if you haven't been to Israel lately, you should go, and we should support. And if you haven't spoken to family and friends there, you should probably give them a call within the next couple of days to remind them that you're concerned about them. But in the essential message of Ezekiel is, or of this vision is, God is in the diaspora too. God is even in Babylonia, this impure land that is inhabited by the people that destroyed us. So that's one message. The other message is that Ezekiel, he's not expecting this, right? He's wandering down by the canal, and then he's sort of blasted by this huge vision. We never know when the message is going to come from God. We don't know what form that message is going to take. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know if it's going to be a big, huge to-do like Ezekiel's vision, or if it's going to be the kol dmama daka, that the still small voice that Elijah hears. But we do know that we should be open to that. And I actually really firmly believe that. I have some very unorthodox ideas about how to understand God, but I do know that I'm hoping that someday I get that communication, and whatever form it takes. I may not be in the right place to listen to it, but I think one of the messages here is that we may not expect this Merkava, this mystical vision, but we should expect that the message is there if we're paying attention, that we might be able to hear it. So with that, that's there's a little bit of some Merkava, some mystical chariot for you tonight. I hope you appreciated that. I'm going to go back to share my screen again for Kadish Ravanan, which is appropriate for mourners, those observing outside, and anybody who's learned some traditional text, which we all have. So if you'd like to join me now, please rise. Yit Gadal, V'yit Kadash, Shemer Rabba, Ve'alema Divra Chirute, Ve'amlik Malchute, V'chayechon, V'yomechon, Chaye Lechol Beit Yisrael, V'agala Ubizman Kariv, V'imru, Amen. Yehi Shemer Rabba Mevarach, Ve'alam Olaleme Alamaya. Yitbarach, V'yitshtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitromam, V'yitnaseh, V'yithadar, V'yit'aleh, V'yithalal, Shemed Kudsha B'richu, Le'ella min kol birchata v'shirata, Tushbechata v'nechemata, Da'amiran ve'alma v'yimru, Amen. Al Yisrael, ve'al Rabbanan, ve'al Tamidehon, ve'al kol Talmidei Tamidehon, ve'al kol man de'asikim ve'oraita, Di ve'atra haden ve'di ve'chol atar ve'atar, Yehe lehon nuchon shel amar Rabba, China v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin v'mzona revicha, Ufurkana min kodam mavohon di v'ishmaya v'imru, Amen. Yehe shel amar Rabba min shmaya, v'chayim tovim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom v'romav, Hu barachamav yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. I want to thank Carly for being our the moderator for us this evening. I want to thank you all for being here. And I want to remind you that if you want to learn some more Torah tomorrow night at Beth Shalom, you're welcome to join us at 9, but you got to register sometime tonight or tomorrow and let us know that you are coming. Take care. Chag Sameach. And I hope to see you all in person next year at the Tikkun Leil Shavuot. Let's hope that it could be at the JCC, that everything will be past all of this pandemic unpleasantness, and we'll be able to study Torah together in person. Take care, stay healthy. If you're not vaccinated, please get vaccinated.